Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to see you all here. We're doing a couple of things today. We're going to do a talk on Ulster Scots Literature and talk about our Ulster Scots Education project and give you a kind of a briefing about where that is currently. And we're also going to announce the winners for our Ulster Scots writing competition. Now, apologies, winners. We can't do this first because we're hoping to have some people from Radio Ulster coming down to record the prize giving. Unfortunately, they have a meeting and they're just about getting out of that meeting now, so you just have to stay a wee bit more, relax for a wee bit more until they come down, and we'll do that after the talk. So we thought we have a captive audience anyway, some people, apologies. It's lovely to be back speaking at PRONI and talking about Ulster Scots here. For the last few years we've had various John Hewitt exhibitions running here in the summer, so it does seem kind of like a second home to be here. So it's lovely to be here. Anyway, enough blather. The education project that we've been working on was to do a number of things, and one of the things was to get Ulster Scots in schools, but get it in schools in a way that it could be made accessible not just to those children and teachers who were from Ulster Scots areas, but across the Northern Ireland curriculum and across schools in Northern Ireland. And part of our job has been to create a series of materials that work at really across the school spectrum, and we're delighted that one of our schools that's been very successful in competitions has also been one of the schools that's been a real leader in helping us develop our materials, and that's Coleraine College. So we're really pleased in many ways that you're here today. As well as creating Ulster Scots schools materials, we've been digitising around 100 key Ulster Scots texts, which should go online this summer. So I know I've been tweeting about big announcements, so I suppose one of the big announcements is the winners, and the other big announcement is that these 100 texts are very close to going up online for people to use and to read and to enjoy. So those are coming together, and from that we're also creating 2 anthologies of Ulster Scots historical materials and literary materials. So hopefully there should be a couple of new books on Ulster Scots materials coming out in the not too distant future. We've run conferences and we've run 2 writing competitions, and that's kind of what we've been doing, keeping ourselves out of mischief. Now, if I say the words Ulster Scots Literature, people sometimes wonder, does it exist? Where is it? What does it actually mean by saying Ulster Scots Literature? And sometimes Ulster Scots writers themselves haven't been too much help, because there can be 3 ways, I would argue, that Ulster Scots writing has been approached. One way is to kind of put it in a twilight world, and I'll explain a bit more about what that means. It has nothing to do with werewolves and vampires, although there might be some writers out there who think it might. Secondly, it's kind of been a tussle between those who know that they're Ulster Scots and that they speak Ulster Scots, and then tourists or newcomers who are trying out or are not really sure what that means. But I'm going to suggest a couple of other ways of looking at what Ulster Scots writing might be all about. The twilight world of Ulster Scots, the daily gap, the light disappearing, has been one of the ways that Ulster Scots have been perceived by people in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. A kind of vanishing tradition, a tradition that has really had its best days, and its best days are behind it. And the best speakers, it's claimed, are those who are probably 75 and above. And there is this great sense of loss, and a sense that perhaps we need to preserve things. I'm not terribly sure about this, because even when we look at some of the best writers in Ulster Scots today, people like James Fenton, their twilight, their daily gap, needs to be questioned in a number of ways. His poem, Daily Gap, we might think is a poem about things vanishing into the darkness. The peat's quite low, the weak saft licht makes black they out by now. The prutice plight, the neat sweet steam clouds round her sweating brow. But qua and bog or keel road wad on lichts a gleeking eye, from where I come and where I'll gae, to neither stay nor leave. to neither stay nor leave, to move maybe more into English. And this has been one of the feelings that Ulster Scots literature has been going into the darkness, away from the world that we know, into the past. The difficulty is that this is literature. It's words. It's people being creative with words. And James Fenton's writing is not necessarily about mourning a past, but seeing what you can do with the actual words that you have in your kind of home language. And this is one of the things that we need to be careful of, that it's not necessarily a tradition that's disappearing, it's a tradition that we just need to know a bit more about. When we look at other Ulster writers like Rnb Wilson, we see similar themes about disappearance and elegy and sadness at people passing. This is a poem that he wrote to Donaghy, a person who was spoken about by Beckett, a mainstream, we might say, Ulster Scots writer. I could have buried a poet here under these hedges and left him happy. Son of the manse he was, and drew his integrity from these white-walled precincts, his rhetoric from his father's pulpit phrase, though he himself has made his covenant elsewhere, an older, darker, and more troubled one, with the certainty of a leaf, of a stone, of a dewdrop. He knew his election. He borrows the language of Presbyterian Calvinism here to honour someone passing. This is not about a language that's disappearing, but it's about a person that's going, invoking the tradition, but not necessarily invoking a tradition that is going away. We might be happy in Ulster Scots studies. I know this is a strange thing, even with all the threatened government cuts that are out there. But we might and we should be happy about what has been done in the last 15 years with Ulster Scots writing. The tradition has begun to be mapped. We have woken up, it seems like Rip Van Winkle, after many years of having a vast archive of literature around us, and people have begun discovering it, talking about it, getting excited about it. Philip Robinson is one of these people who has begun to unlock a number of potential people for us to go and read, not just as people willing to preserve a tradition, but people who want to read these people as writers, as authors who have something to say. Preservation is a good idea, and I'm speaking here from the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. You guys know how important this is. This is one of the great citadels of ideas, of knowledge, of things that the public share together. And arguably, Ulster Scots writing needs to be preserved, because it shows things that have been previously not so much unknown, but forgotten. These people really did exist. These people really did speak like that. They did not invent it for any other purpose other than this was the way they spoke. The difficulty, though, with preservation is that and I know there are a number of archivists in the room, so I'm going to be very careful what I say here, because it's a long way to the door. We can get too fixated on certain points. We can get too hung up on certain things, and perhaps sometimes Ulster Scots literature has got too hung up on certain things. Is it a language? Is it a literature? Is it a dialect? Those long-running debates, which are not necessarily the most important questions we need to raise. And we can get excited about that pure material that's there, but we then get worried about it. It seems vulnerable. It might vanish. It's too kind of far away from the mainstream. And we can hold on to things too much. And the worst thing for any writer is to hold on and not share their hoard of words. Because the danger, and I know there are archivists here, and I love a library myself, but if we just keep things inside and we don't share them, we don't engage with them, they can disappear. And I hope there is no fire alarm here, although it would really add to the drama of this slide.
things need to go out there. They need to be shared. They need to be embraced by new generations. You can't break a language. You can't break poetry. You can try, you can create, you can play in it. That's what Ulster Scots Literature needs to do. Because if we get too hung up on what we own, we don't share it. George A. Birmingham, one of our great early 20th century novelists, got very annoyed about what had happened to Ballintoy. He wrote the following in 1934. That country is tourist haunted now, even Ballintoy, surely most perilous of all boat havens, has its tea room, which would be a dreadful desecration if it were not housed in a cottage which was there before the sea and run by two tea ladies who have been tuned into harmony by the spirit of the place. I am told the crossing of the rope bridge at Carrick-a-Reed is now counted as a little thing, but when I was a boy, there was a real risk in crossing, for the bridge swung free, far above jagged rocks and breaking waves, without even a handrail. The white rocks at the end of Portrush Strand are, alas, tourist-haunted now, like so much that once was solitary. We can love a thing too much. We can hold on to it too much, so that we become the solitary last person who owns the thing. The difficulty then is, it vanishes when we vanish. 3 ways of looking at Ballintoy. This is not a quiz, there will be no prizes. But one could say, what is the actual view of Ballintoy here? Does it represent a real Ballintoy? Well, arguably, none of these represent the real Ballintoy. One is a photograph, one is a painting, and one is from Game of Thrones. All of these represent creative ways of dealing with the concept of Ballintoy. And these are ways that George A. Birmingham would have not allowed us to do, because they don't seem to hang on to what he thought was the key authentic sense of Ballintoy. But then we lose the chance to play with what is ours. Other ways of looking at Ulster Scots, moving away from what Jeremy Smith has suggested about the danger of thinking only in terms of purity in language, is that maybe we should see Ulster Scots not so much as a separate thing, but something that is on the gradient, on the spectrum of language in this part of the world. And we should learn to love that kind of gradient, to know that even though we may be in Belfast, there are elements of Ulster Scots even here. People get scunnered, people are still thrown in streets of Belfast. But if we move up towards Antrim and down towards the Ards, there are stronger pockets, stronger connections of Ulster Scots language out there for us to enjoy. It's about realising that we're in a spectrum of language and seeing where we might go and seeing what we might create within it. But how do we do this? Well, our project suggests that how we do this is the archives. Go to the archives. There's a bad joke I could make about The Godfather at this point. When things get in difficulty, you go to the mattresses, because that's where your guns are hidden. But here, for literary students, we go to the archives. That's where the important things are. A little quote from Jacques Derrida: nobody expected a French post-structuralist thinker to be involved in Ulster Scots, but he probably would have been if he'd been alive. But he makes the following statement about what archives really mean. As is the case for the Latin archivum or archium, a word that is used singular as was the French archive, formerly employed as a masculine singular on archive. There will be a test on this at the end. The meaning of archive, its only meaning, comes to it from the Greek archeion, initially a house, a domicile, an address, the residence of the superior magistrates, the archon, those who commanded. Archives command us to do and think in certain ways. They play a significant role in cultural and social history. That's why we felt we had to archive and digitize the materials that we had. And the selection or deselection of archival material shapes public memory for better or for worse. If Ulster Scots has been deselected in the past, well, it's time to get over that now, because Ulster Scots is out there as a literature, and we will supply this literature and this library. History influences archival practice and theory, which in turn influences further history. If we want to go somewhere good in this part of the world, we can only go there by knowing the strengths and the skills and the creativity of the writers of the past. Archives are memory keepers. They're instruments of transparency and accountability. They show who really wrote the material, who really wrote the books. They're about our corporate knowledge, and they're about making future decisions, not just at the point of government, but at the point of creativity, at the point of imagining new ways of being. I'd argue that this is a time that Ulster Scots Studies is at a new threshold. The sun is actually shining out the door. For so long the sun has not been shining, and the sun may not shine again. But at this point in time, the sun is shining and it's time to go out the door. If you save one book, you can find out the life and the culture and the feelings and the thoughts of one person. If you preserve 100 and link them together and hear how they speak to each other and how they speak to us, you can discover enormous amounts of information about where we came from. And that is what our project is about. It links us to the sense of the vernacular world. And so what? Well, when people get engaged with the vernacular, things happen. Revolutions occur. If you look at the criticism on the concept of vernacularity, you see it occurs at a number of key points. One of these key points is in the medieval era, when indigenous languages began to take over from Latin. The world shifts when the vernacular is brought into play. In the 20th and 21st century, where you see vernacular, you see people rising up against those who might oppress them. So there's a great deal of interest in vernacularity in post-colonial writing, in the writing of people of colour and race. Ulster Scots has a vernacularity to it that we haven't even appreciated yet. We haven't even worked out. The vernacular world is there for us to go and discover. And it's places like this that will help us do that. Because it's not about a dry history lesson. It's about the words that are there just at the back, the tip of our tongue. The words that people in this room have demonstrated a great ability in writing. That they can play with them. Because now it's not about thumping tables and asking for recognition with Ulster Scots, as much as it is a time to play with the culture, to engage with it, to share with it, to celebrate it. And this is what our project, I hope, will ultimately achieve. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'll not keep you sort of too much longer, but I just wanted to say just a few more things about our project and its impact really on Ulster Scots Studies. Firstly, my background is slightly different to Frank's, in that my background is really 20th century Irish literature. I studied, my PhD was on Samuel Beckett, So there's quite a sort of a difference there, coming from sort of Beckett studies in 20th century literature and stepping into this. And 4 years ago, when I started first got involved with the Ulster Poetry Project and started sort of learning a little bit about Ulster Scots and about this literature and things that I've said before, you know, the fact that I sort of can't believe I look back through my sort of my school education and my university education, and I had not heard of the Ryman Weaver poets, for example, and you sort of think, how could that happen through an education system? So coming from Beckett was quite interesting, because Beckett, one of the quotations I particularly like from Samuel Beckett is from his text Worstward Ho, in which he says, "Ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, feel better." And I think that quite sort of works almost in Ulster Scots studies, because over the years there's been an attempt to try and get people more engaged, to try and make people understand exactly what Ulster Scots literature is about. We have been trying to feel better. So with being involved in the Ulster Poetry Project and then taking on the Ulster Scots Education Project, I came at it very much from the perspective that this project had to speak and to work for people like myself, people who hadn't grown up through their, with their lives with the knowledge of Ulster Scots literature, and had to work on that level in terms of mainstream. And that's very much how Frank and I approached this project, was to mainstream Ulster Scots literature and not to look at it as something which is extreme or marginalised. And I think that's been part of the problem in the past. In order to engage with schools, therefore, we were not setting out to create a new curriculum for Ulster Scots studies. Our task really, and as we worked closely with with SIA and the Education Board, was to embed Ulster Scots literature within the existing curriculum for schools. So we had to look at what the schools are currently studying and work out how do we get Ulster Scots literature sitting alongside that. In one way, that's more difficult than creating a new curriculum, but Frank and I really loved that approach, because by doing that, it shows that Ulster Scots has the capacity for mainstreaming. It isn't a literature that should be set aside and creating something completely new or separate from the main school's curriculum in which to house it, but that it would exist within what's already there. So the materials were not designed, the materials that we have designed for schools, and we've created about 15 units for schools that have been trialled and will go forward, hopefully with SIA. But these materials are not designed to promote Ulster Scots literature per se, but rather to map the development of the culture of Northern Ireland, demonstrating how Ulster Scots history and literature has impacted upon contemporary culture and contemporary identity, and exploring its significance and its relevancy for the Northern Ireland education system today, right now, as we go forward. So one of the ways that we have done this, what button did you push? The enter. This is an example just of one of the units that we've created, and this was for GCSE, for the current GCSE curriculum that looks at the unseen poem. So what we did was to use Ulster Scots poetry and to take this into schools and allow school pupils to study an Ulster Scots poem, for example, as part of the unseen poem. So you're still teaching them all of the skills that they will need to know to answer that in GCSE examinations. So it helps with literature, but it's also used and embedded into history and into citizenship and into IT. So you're taking Ulster Scots material, but you're looking at it across this range of different themes and different subjects. So as Frank has already said, this is all part of unlocking the archive. And again, I think it's often sort of think with the tradition of Ulster Scots is that there's been this, almost this attempt to ring fence it and safeguard it, and as Frank has said, you know, not let anyone else play with it, because there's a sense of, well, it's mine and I own it, and I'm the only person who has a right to actually comment on what it's about. Well, that's not the case, because to mainstream something and get everybody talking about it, you have to allow other people to engage with it and other people to have their say on it. So it is about unlocking the archive. Ulster Scots should not be seen as a relic, as something that we do put into an archive. Yes, we need to do that in order to preserve it, but it is not something to just be preserved or locked away in an archive or a museum. It is a living thing. It is relevant to today. And when you think about these poets, this is just one of the examples of one of the texts that we have digitised. When you think about these poets were modern poets. You know, they weren't poets, as Frank has said, that, you know, had an agenda to write in a certain way. This is just how they spoke, and they were modern to their time, and they were saying things that were relevant in their day. So they were speaking to the present, and this again is something that, as part of this Ulster Scots education project, that we felt we needed to do. We needed to speak to the present to make this relevant for everybody now. But digitising is not enough. It's not enough just to digitise a text, because we need to add value to it as well. Through the digitisation process, you get to add value to something. And it's not just a matter of digitising in terms of preservation, but because when you think about it, you know, if you're doing it just for those reasons, the hard copy, the book, will actually probably last longer than the digitised version as technology changes and becomes obsolete. So 100 years from now, we probably will still have the books, but we may not have the digitised. So therefore, we need to think about it not just as digitising something to preserve it, but digitising it for further reasons really than that. And this brings us into the realm and how this project will sort of move forward as well. When you get into things like text mining, this is a very sort of interesting term that's used at the minute, the idea of text mining. So when you digitize a text, that the software will then allow you to do more than just read the text. So for example, you see these things at times where they take like a really popular text, like Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, to give you an example, and they'll take what they say the most sort of frequently used words throughout that text, and they put them on bags and they put them on mugs, you know, so you have like Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, and you know, but they're actually not the most popular words in that text. The most sort of popular words within the text are and they and he and she. And when you start comparing things like that from digitised material, that actually tells you something about gender studies. So by digitising, it's something more than what you have here. You're adding value to the texts, and this is what this project will continue to do. Dr. Hogg, he says that employing digital technology can really benefit students and scholars, especially when they're not getting too caught up with a particular gizmo as such, using it just to use it. Instead, it's a question of how technology can both aid in traditional modes of scholarship and study and create new ways of approaching it. And this is what we need to think about, because this is what our youth are growing up with now and are used to. They come from the digital world, and therefore this is something that they expect as well as they go through the education system. This is John Hewitt, as you all know, John Hewitt very much sort of provides us with a window into the past, and also, of course, he was a modern poet himself. John Hewitt was responsible, of course, for preserving a lot of these texts, for writing his MA thesis on the Rhyming Weaver poets. And of course, I always have to tell this story in case there's somebody here who hasn't heard it, but when John Hewitt submitted his thesis to Queen's, his professors did not believe that these poets existed, to the point that John Hewitt physically had to take them down to the Linen Hall Library and say, look, there they are on the bookshelves. So John Hewitt was very much aware of the need to be talking about these writers because they had relevance to him in the 20th century, and continue, of course, to do so. And you see it even with his poetry as he taps into some of those ideas within the poems. This is, again, just a scan, a digitised copy of John Hewitt's notebook, which is held up at Ulster University on the Coleraine campus. And this is his poem, Once Alien Here. And you can see when you go out into the foyer there, the great example of Hewitt's poetry, just up on the wall if you look up. But in Once Alien Here, he says, and I'll not read all of the poem, but the second verse, he says, talking about tradition and talking about diversity and talking about inclusion, all the things that are relevant to how we think about Ulster Scots. He says, so I, because of all the buried men in Ulster clay, because of rock and glen and mist and cloud and quality of air, as native in my thought as any here, who now would seek a native mode to tell our stubborn wisdom individual, yet lacking skill in either scale of song, the braver English, lyric Irish tongue, must let this rich earth so enhance the blood with steady pulse where now is plunging mood till thought and image may identified find easy voice to utter each aright. That sense of Hewitt being aware of the diversity in Northern Ireland, and also looking for a way to have inclusion, is something in a way too that how we've tried to sort of approach this project. And in terms of, I'll not keep it too long on the pedagogical reasons for the project, but this is an image really of the pedagogue and the boy. And when we think about pedagogy in terms of schools and in terms of university education, we think about quality teaching and how do you produce quality outcomes for learning for students. The word pedagogue actually relates to the slave who used to escort Roman children to school. So that's where it comes from, this idea of somebody literally taking the child to the school. And when we were thinking sort of about this project, we thought, well, how do we take the education, the idea into the school? So it's sort of like the reverse, almost of this outwards, inwards approach. And we came up with a range of ways to do that. One of the ways, as Frank has mentioned, was we ran a writing competition last year just with Coleraine College, and we produced a small anthology showcasing really the work that had been produced at Coleraine College. And our winners last year, examples of some of the poetry up here of Chloe Campbell and Sarah Smith as well, where you go into a school and you talk to pupils about some of these ideas and they engage with it, because what they're doing is they're actually learning about home and they're learning about their own sense of identity and place, and it's inclusive, and that's the important sort of point about it. So the materials that we're producing can be used as a creative resource, which was important, but it also fits into what we call what's called the Quality Assurance Association, again, which sort of governs higher education that university levels will be looking at. So they say, that we need to have, these are the subject-specific skills for English at HE level, that students should have an awareness of how different social and cultural contexts affect the nature of language and meaning, that they should have an understanding of how cultural norms and assumptions influence questions of judgment, and that they should have a comprehension of the complex nature of literary languages and awareness of the relevant research by which they may be better understood. So this is at the HE level, so we need to be doing this as well at the schools level, to be equipping our students and our pupils with these skills that we all expect them to have. And Ulster Scots Literature is again a way of enabling that process to happen. But of course, there has been a sense of sort of inertia, and Isaac Newton, again, you didn't think you'd be hearing from Isaac Newton today either, but again he says that an object at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. And as Frank has said, we feel this moment within Ulster Scots Studies is a crucial one, because momentum has built up over the past few years. Things are beginning to get done, and that quotation continues, something in motion tends to stay in motion. So it's a point now where we can produce the materials, we can do all of this stuff, but it's up to the education system, it's up to the public, it's up to community groups to engage with materials that are produced, because if they're not, then again these materials will be produced and will die away if nothing is actually done with them. So the project has looked at Ulster Scots Studies and the arts, Ulster Scots Studies in new media and established media, Ulster Scots Studies in the classroom, and Ulster Scots Futures and the community. So we're looking at how Ulster Scots impacts across this range of areas, and it was important to do that as well, rather than just focusing on one. And again, coming back to the idea of the sort of threshold moment, I'll just sort of close with this. I wanted just to quote from Virginia Woolf. There's no relevance to the Ulster Scots project, but it's in terms of a threshold moment. And this is from Virginia Woolf To the Lighthouse, which we teach obviously up at Coleraine. And it's just an episode that I just personally really love, and I wanted to share it with you because it captures this moment with Mrs. Ramsay on the threshold as she leaves the door and looks back on a dinner party. Any of you who know this text knows that the dinner party had gone really badly, and it all works out sort of in the end, but she stands on the threshold of the door about to leave it, and she says, "It was necessary now to carry everything a step further. With her foot on the threshold, she waited a moment longer in a scene which was vanishing even as she looked, and then as she moved and took Minta's arm and left the room, it changed. It shaped itself differently. It had become, she knew, giving one last look at it over her shoulder, already the past." This idea that you're stepping into something new, I think, is where we feel we're at the moment. That it is part of the past, but you're stepping into the future. It's now, and it is present. And Cousin says that to be considered to be akin to passing through a portal or a conceptual gateway that opens up previously inaccessible ways of thinking about something. That's what we have tried to do with this project, to open up previously inaccessible ways about thinking about something and about getting people to think differently and to engage differently with this area of literature and history. So it's new ideas of thinking about change and new methods of disseminating those ideas, and that's how we're going to take things forward. So thanks so much for listening as we we wanted to update you really on this project today, because this project is funded by MAG-Ulster, by the Ministerial Advisory Group for Ulster Scots Studies. You know, it's public funding, and we thought it was right that the public knew really what was going on, how this money had been spent, and what was being produced out of it. And I'll just invite Frank back up as we sort of